All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Incredible new daf in Maseches Pesachim, exceptionally exciting. We begin by thanking our sponsors, Semi and Malka Esterson, for dedicating all the Shir and Drushos this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib Ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim. We thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Eli and Joel Rashkovsky, in memory of Joel's grandfather's yahrzeit, Yehuda Ben Yosef. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for Nizchus V'Rafua Shalema, for Ruchama Aviva Bas Sheina Chana, as well as for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We thank all of our sponsors, all of the Neshama Shav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who require Refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. We'll say, here we go. Today's Daf is Gimel. Really, really incredible daf today. So we'll say we are picking up on Beis and with Beis 2b, and we are picking up 5 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, we have a singular focus, right? Our singular focus is, what is the definition of R? It's a very simple question. Yet I will say sometimes it's the most simple questions of life that could take an incredibly long time to answer. So what is R? So what's the Mamish? I know I left you at the cliffhanger, although not really, because the Gemara already proved it a little bit, a number of times. Interestingly enough, not through the Psukim that we mentioned, right? The Psukim kind of proved to be a bit inconclusive. What did help us was the Brises and the Mishnayos, which clearly indicated to us that R was a lashon of nighttime. So we'll say last case. We'll say this is also fascinating because when we see this today also, the Gemara is bringing down like a whole bunch of cases, nothing to do with Pesachim. But again, we'll say this is part of the beauty of Gemara, part of the beauty of Daf Yomi is it's a roller coaster. You know, you get to be exposed to a whole bunch of different concepts throughout Shas. So we go v'idach. Meisvei. So I'm sorry, 4 lines are from the bottom. Ein masin masuos ela ala chodesh nir bizmano. We started with this yesterday. Halacha l'maisa, in the Jewish calendar, so a month could have one of 2 possibilities, either 29 days or 30 days. So we'll say, understand, how would Beis Din signal the arrival of Yom Tiv? So they would go ahead and burn torches, burn bonfires. We'll say, one of our Yarchei Kalas, when we went down, when we were driving up north actually, so you pass by a number of the mountains that are enumerated in the Mishnayos and Sukkah about where they went ahead and they burned the masuos. Rosh Hashanah, not Sukkah, I'm sorry, where they burned the masuos. So listen to this. So they would only burn the masuos, interestingly enough, when the month had 29 days. Remember again, the month is 29 days, Rosh Chodesh is day 30. So they would go ahead and they would light the bonfires. When Rabbi was saying, they would light the bonfires night 31. So remember again, 29 days, that's the end of the month. Day 30 is Rosh Chodesh. That night 31, they would light the bonfires, and people would know that the previous day was Rosh Chodesh. If the month was 30 days, we call that a male, right? We call that a complete month. So halacha l'maisa, in the case of a male, ultimately, again, they would not go ahead and create the bonfires. In that case, again, because I will say they didn't have to, meaning the only time you really have to create a bonfire is if the month was what's called the chaser. But if it's a complete month, a full month, halacha l'maisa, there was no need for the bonfires. So here we go. So we'll say you'll see this. Rashi points all of this out. So they would only go ahead and light the bonfires for a month that was 29 days, lekadsho, to go ahead and sanctify it. Fine, so take a look at Rashi. You forced me. If it's a pregnant month, which means 30 days. Rosh Chodesh is day 31. Ein mekadshin also shekvar kichuo shamayim. We'll say, remember again, 31, right? Day 31 as Rosh Chodesh is almost like the default setting. Even if you do absolutely nothing, day 31 by definition has to be Rosh Chodesh. Vashmo inon hai tana de achsar avdin al masuos va'amoli lo avdin al masuos. So we only go ahead and kindle the bonfire for what's called a Chodesh Chaser, a 29-day month, but not for a 30-day month. And when do you go ahead and burn the bonfires? Lo'or iburo. Rashi points out, Leil sha'avar shloshim, lo dia shayom niskadesh. Leil shloshim ve'echad. We'll say you burn the bonfires on night 31. So listen to this. Ve'imasai masimasuos, lo'or iburo. We'll say, what do you see? Alma or artahu. From here you see that R means nighttime. Shmamina, the Gemara says, indeed, this is a conclusive proof. Good. So we'll say once again, another Mishnaic proof to the notion that R means nighttime. Weiter, Meisiv, we're not finished. Haya omid umakriv, haya omid kol halayla umakriv ala mizbeach. We'll say if a Kohen was doing avoda the entire night. Now remember, you can't do avoda the entire night. The only thing you could possibly do the entire night is what? Burning avarim and pedarim, burning fats and limbs. But let's say the Kohen was working all night, right? Baruch Hashem, there was an incredible amount of carbonic activity over the course of the evening. So again, the Kohen is going ahead and burning everything the entire night. So what happens? La'ora in the morning, ta'un kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So we'll say in the morning, ultimately, again, the Kohen is going to have to go ahead and sanctify his hands and feet. Now, I will say, every morning when the Kohen comes to the Beis HaMikdash, he has to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, right? Remember again, he goes to the Kiyar, turns on the Kiyar, washes his hands and feet. The Chiddush of Rabbi is what? Is that Halacha L'Maisa, he's been up the entire night. He's been working the entire night. He never went to sleep. Nevertheless, the halacha is he must go ahead and wash again in the morning. Divrei Rebbe. So we'll say these are the words of Rebbe. So we'll say, so again, what do you see? Now here, Ora seems to indicate that what? What does Ora mean? Right? La'ora ton kiddush. We'll say, what does Ora mean? What does it mean? Morning. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, no, throw this case out. Ora shiny. We'll say, we're looking at R. We're looking at R, not Ora. So Ora, maybe Ora means morning, but at least R itself, as we've seen it a number of times, means nighttime. Good. Massive Marzutra, we'll say another fascinating case, top of Gimel Amud Aleph. Massive Marzutra, Hamapeles or Lishmonim ve'echad. So we'll say, what happens if a woman miscarries on the 81st night? What's happening over here? We'll say, Midda Oraisa, a woman gives birth to a girl. She is Tameya for 14 days. 14 days. After that, she is Tahora for 66 days. Now, we'll say what this means. Again, we don't have this concept as it applies in the Torah today because our in general, our Hilchos Nida and Hilchos Zava have kind of combined into one framework. But on a pure Midaraisa level, a woman gives birth. For 14 days after she gives birth, any bleeding, she's Tameya. After that, after those 14 days, for the next 66 days, even if she bleeds, that is called Dam Tohar. Called Dam Tohar, does not render it Tameya in any way. So we'll say, listen to the... So actually look at Rashi for just a moment. Hamapeles or Lishmonim. Bekrisis beperakama dekaimalon zos trasi alelis malamish mevia carbon echad avlodos harbe. Yochel shetavi ala leidish lifnei malos v'aleidish la achar malos. So we'll say, now remember, after the 66 days, what does she do? She brings a carbon. She brings a carbon. Now, the truth is, even if she experienced multiple births, or really it would be miscarriages, over the course of the 60 days, halacha l'may says she could bring one carbon for multiple leidos. So the Gemara says, listen to this, but that's not what we're focusing on over here. Look what the Gemara says. Kigon, skip to the first short line in Rashi. Kigon, shetavla l'sof shuvai. So remember again, I will say the way it works is like this. After 14 days, she goes to the mikvah. Vinis Abra, and let's say again, she becomes pregnant again after going to the mikvah. Ve'pila, and now she miscarries. So we'll say, so again, so the woman in our case over here has given birth. She gives birth to a girl. She's tameh for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, she goes to the mikvah. After going to the mikvah, she becomes pregnant. Sometime over the course of, and then she miscarries. So we'll say, now remember, what's our shaila? Our shaila is going to be, she has to bring a carbon at the end of 66 days. The shaila is, does she have to bring one carbon? Or does she have to bring 2 carbonos? One for the birth and one for the miscarriage. So the Gemara says, it depends. The Gemara says, Im toch mulo sipila, if she miscarries sometime in the next 66 days. So nefteres be'carbon echad, one carbon covers everything. So we'll say, as long as the miscarriage occurred within what we call the melos, the next 66 days, the carbon she brings at the end covers everything. But if halacha l'maisa, she miscarries after the 66 days, so we'll say, let's say she miscarried after 66 days, but before she brought her carbon yoledes. So it's after what we call after melos, but before she brought the carbon. So what's the halacha? At that point in time, her obligation to bring the first carbon has already devolved upon her. Therefore, again, kodum leidishnia, before the second birth, and therefore she must bring 2 carbonos, one for the first birth and one for the miscarriage. So we'll say, so now here's the shiloh. So now that's hilchos tumas leida in a nutshell. So we'll say, now watch this. What happens? Hamapeles the or shmonim. Shmonim v'achad. We'll say, what happens if a woman miscarries? the R of the 81st day. So Rabbi say, so again, here's what's happened. She gives birth to a girl. 14 days she's Tamea. She goes to the mikvah. She becomes pregnant. She then miscarries on R of the 81st day. So her period for the first birth ended, or I should say came to a close, and then she miscarries the R of the 81st. So Rabbi says, so what's the shayla? Does she have to bring one carbon leda or two carbonos leda? So Beis Shammai poachim carbon. Beis Shammai says that halacha l'maisa she doesn't have to bring a second carbon leda. Or Beis Hillel mechayvim. Beis Hillel says no, she has to bring two carbonos. Amr then Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, Ma'ishna or shmonim ve'echad miyom shmonim ve'echad. So Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, why should the R of the 81st day be different than the actual 81st day? Ultimately, again, if they're the same for Tumah, should not be the same for carbon. I will say again, remember, we're not bringing this down for Tumah's Leda purposes. Why are we bringing this down? One word. R. or Artu. Rabbi say from the fact that Beis Hillel says to Beis Shammai, what's the difference between the day of the 81st and the R of the 81st indicates to us what? R means night. Shmamina. Interestingly enough, we're just not finished with this. So we'll say another incredible halacha by karbanos. Or lishlishi. So we'll say, what is this talking about? If you look at Rashi, it's Rashi divrei hamaschil or lishlishi. It's probably about 8 lines up from before Rashi gets wide. So look at the Gemara. It says, or l'shlishi, lo or knisaso shel shlishi, hachanami garsin, or l'shlishi va'ashlamim kai. So we'll say this is talking about a carbon shlamim. So let's look at the carbon shlamim. Dichsiv b'hu biyom ziv chachem, yo ziv chechem, yo yeachel, umimacharas v'tziva. So let's listen to this. The halacha is that a shlamim could be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. That's the halacha by a shlamim. So it says the Gemara. So back to the Gemara. Meisvei yachal yenechal or l'shlishi. You might have thought that shlamim can be eaten or l'shlishi. Now I will say I'm not really supposed to translate the word or until the end of the Gemara, but just understand the Gemara will make more sense if we translate it. So we'll say so. Bepashtos or means night. So I might have thought that a shlamim could be eaten on the night of the 3rd day, which means also just to illustrate, it's Tuesday. If I offer up a carbon shlamim today, so how much time do I have? I have Tuesday night, and Wednesday. I might have thought that I should also be able to eat a carbon shlamim on Wednesday night. To which the Gemara says, Yochel diachal nechal or l'shlishi v'dinu. I'll tell you why. The Gemara says, Zvachim nechal miyom echad. Generally, carbonos have a window of consumption of 1 day. Ushlamim nechal l'shnei yomim, but shlamim can be eaten for 2 days. Mal halon laila achar yom. But we'll say by regular carbon you have 1 day. But we'll say what does 1 day include? If I offer up stomach, whatever carbon it is, I offer up a carbon today. So we'll say what's the window of consumption? It's today and tonight. That's generally the way carbonos work. When we say you have 1 day, you have 1 day and the following night. Afkan laila achar yom. So I would have thought by shlamim the halacha is the same. Which is what? The night should follow the day. So shlamim gives me 2 days. But really what it should do is give me 2 days and 1 night. I have Tuesday and tonight, and I should have Wednesday and tomorrow night also. To which we're going to say, Tamulomar, biyom zivchechem. Biyom zivchechem ye'achel umi macharas. I'm sorry. Biyom zivchechem ye'achel umi macharas. Vanoser ad yom. And that which is left over until the next day should be burned. Ba'od yom unechal. Shlamim could only be eaten ultimately again by day. But ultimately again cannot be consumed on the 3rd night. So you might have thought, therefore, again, Abosai, when offering up a shlamim. So if I offer up a shlamim on Tuesday, here's what I know. I offer up a shlamim on Tuesday, so I can eat it on Tuesday night, Wednesday, but I cannot eat it Wednesday night. I see. You might have thought, therefore, that I have to burn it immediately on Wednesday night. And I would have said the following: Stam carbonos can be eaten for 1 day, and the following night, shlamim could be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. Take it for achilas. I will say, just like by stam carbonos, generally the halacha is as soon as you finish eating it, that's when you burn it. Rabbi say, take stomach carbon, right? Stomach carbon, right? So let's say again, you offer up a chatas, the kohen gets to eat the chatas. He gets it for one day and night. Rabbi say, as soon as that night is over and day breaks, he has to burn whatever's left over. So stomach carbon, as soon as the window of consumption closes, the obligation to burn the rest devolves upon you. Afkan, take it flachilas reifa. So too by shlamim, Rabbi say, I would have thought that what? I would have thought that halacha lamaisa, immediately following achila. So remember again, by shlamim, Rabbi say, if I offer up the shlamim, I can eat it until when? Again, shlamim review. If I offer up a shlamim on Tuesday, I can eat it until when? Wednesday. Wednesday when? Wednesday night. Up until Wednesday night. So I would have thought, therefore, the obligation to go ahead and burn the rest of the shlamim ultimately, again, develops for me on Wednesday night. Take it la'achila sreifa. Immediately following the window of consumption, I have to burn the rest. Talmud lomar v'anoser mebasar azevach bayom hashlishi ba'eshi sarev. Therefore, the pasuk says, whatever is left over shall be burnt on the third day. Bayom ata sorev v'ata sorfa b'layla. Ultimately, again, you burn the leftovers by day, but not by night. So I will say again, midika amar yeinechal or lishlishi. They both say the fact that the Gemara says, I might have thought that a shlamim could be eaten on the night of the third night, which I both say again for our purposes means, in our illustration, Wednesday night. Alma or artahu. You see once again that the lashon of ar means nighttime. Shmamina says the Gemara, indeed that is correct, that ar will generally mean nightfall. Good. They both say one more. Shmamina. So good. Both say we're just lining up proof after proof after proof. Tasha will say first wide line. First, we'll say I just want to mention that understand how profound these Gemaras are. You know, this Daf Yomi, so we go quickly, but I will say just see what the yesodistic ideas that we're covering over the course of just a few moments, right? We have Karbanos, Omid Bayom Makriv Kalalayla. We have Mapeles, right? The halachos of childbirth. Again, these are all incredible constructs in halacha. We just said about say Shlamim. So now again, 2 days, one night, it's Kedai, if a person just jots down these concepts as you go through, because these are Shas concepts, these appear all over the place, to get these frameworks down, even if I can't remember every last detail, to remember these bullet points is incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful to remember the daf, but even if I can't remember the whole daf, if I remember these concepts, incredibly helpful. Says the Gemara, Tashma, or Shalom Kippurim Mispal Shalom Misvader. We'll say, or Shalom Kippurim, on the night of Yom Kippur, you go ahead and you daven 7 brachas in Shmona Esrei, and you recite vidui. Shachris, mispalo sheva misvada. Shachris in the morning, you daven 7 brachas and vidui. The musaf mispalo sheva brachas misvada. Musaf 7 brachas and vidui. B'mincha mispalo sheva misvada. So we'll say again. Seems to be the model for Yom Kippur. The Gemara says 7 brachas and vidui. 7 brachas just means the 3 beginning, the 3 end, 1 central bracha of the Yom bracha, and then in addition to that vidui. This what about Ma'ariv? This is Ma'ariv Matzah Yom Kippur. The Ma'ariv Mispalo Me'in Shmona Esrei. Ultimately, again in Ma'ariv, you go ahead and you daven Me'in Shmona Esrei. Rabbi say Me'in Shmona Esrei is Havinenu. Going back to our brachas days, Rabbi say, if you remember again, we had the concept of Havinenu, which was a truncated form of Shmona Esrei, where essentially what you do is you take the first 3 brachas, the last 3 brachas, and you combine all of the middle brachos into one comprehensive bracha. So the Gemara here, by the way, this would pass with no objections, right? Can you imagine having named Shmona Esrei and Matzah Yom Kippur? Man, we should be lining up. So we'll say the Gemara says no. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Mishum Avosav Mispal Shmona Esrei Shlemos Mipnei Shetzarach Lomar Havdalah B'Chonin Adas. Not true. Not true. We'll say you have to daven a full Shmona Esrei on Matzah Yom Kippur. Why? Because you have to recite Atachan and Tanu. You need to recite Havdalah. Rabbi say this goes back to Gemara Maseches Brachos discusses this. The Gemara Maseches Brachos discusses, can you recite Havinenu ad Matzah Shabbos? Because what Havinenu does not allow for, let's say like this, what Havinenu allows for is an expedited prayer experience. You could condense everything into one middle bracha. What Havinenu does not allow for is the insertion of anything unique. So there's no Yale v'Yavo, right? There's no Ala Nisim. None of that gets into Havinenu. So to Havdalah can't get into Havinenu either. So therefore the Gemara suggests that Halacha L'maisa, on Matzah Shabbos, you can't daven a Havinenu because there's nowhere to insert Havdalah. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, but what do you see from here? Again, Remember, this is fascinating. I will say, but for our purposes, what's intriguing to us? Or Shel Yom Kippurim. And remember, obviously, this is tracing the progression of a chronological day. So we go from Or to Shacharis, which tells you what? Or means Alma Or Artu Shmamina. But we'll say, see that Or means evening, and indeed this is, we'll say, no, there's an incredible mussar in this. Isn't it incredible that you can go through an entire Yom Kippur in 2 lines? Right? Or Shacharis Musaf Mincha Ma'ariv. We'll say, sometimes that's the way life works. Sometimes even the most impactful and meaningful experiences occurs so quickly. In fact, again, the halacha is, in the halachos for Pesach, so the Shulchan Aruch right after talk. Well, we'll leave it for. I'm gonna stay on track here. Anyway, the point over here is that halacha l'maisa, sometimes an entire Yom Kippur, sometimes an entire life flies by, and yet I didn't find the opportunity to extract all of the meaning from it. Yom Kippur could start on one line, end on the next line. Life could start in one moment, come to end in the next moment, and the goal is extract every ounce of meaning, because everything flies by so quickly. And the more meaningful the experience, often the faster it goes by. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Tashma, Tani de Shmuel, Levi Arbasar, Bokines Achamis La'arner. So also listen to this. Another braysa, the Beis Shmuel said, the night of the 14th, you check for chametz la'araner, alma or artu. Now, I will say, now here's what's interesting. This braysa clearly parallels our Mishnah, right? But yet in this braysa, the braysa doesn't use the lashon of ar. Instead, what does the braysa use? The braysa uses the lashon of leile arbasar. The fact that the braysa uses leile interchangeably with ar tells me that what? Tells me that halacha l'maisa ar means nighttime. Good. So we'll say effectively, here we go. So we'll say, here's the conclusion. Ella, bein Rav Huna, bein Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, we'll say the Gemara says, you're right. So both according to Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda, the kule alma ar artahu. Everyone agrees that ar means night. I'll say, good. We finally, I will say, now this is quite dramatic, because remember again, how did we start this Gemara, right? The first line in Maseches Pesachim, I will say. You did this, we went over this in your Chazara last night. What does ar mean? Rav Huna said it means naki, and Rabbi Yehuda says it means lele. So naki, we assumed, means what? Light. Light. And Rabbi Yehuda said it meant lele, laila, night. So I will say, so I don't understand. So this whole time, do we assume that the machlokes is, does ar mean nighttime or does ar mean daytime? To which the Gemara says, no. Bein Rav Huna, bein Rav Yehuda, the kuli ama ar artu. Everyone agrees that the Mishnah in the beginning of Masechet Pesachim, ar la'arbas bokin hasachametz, that ar means what? Ar means what? Night. Really? V'lo pligi. Both they're not arguing. I wish you would have told me that a blot ago. Right? They're not arguing. To which the Gemara says, Mar kiasre umar kiasre. Both say they're both just using a lashon based on where they came from. Each of them was talking in the way that they spoke in their respective locales. The Gemara says, listen to this. Be'ased Rav Huna karinaki u'be'ased Rav Yehuda karulele. Apparently in Rav Huna's city, they would call nighttime light. They would call it light. Now I will say, now what does that mean? They would call it night. We'll see in just a moment. And in Rabbi Yehuda's city, they would ultimately call nighttime laila, night. So therefore, I will say, it turns out that there was no machlokes. This whole time we thought it was a machlokes, but in fact not. When Rav Huna said that ar means naghi, light, he did not mean to say that bedikas chametz takes place in the morning, but rather again in Rav Huna's locale, the way they refer to nighttime is light. Okay, so let's analyze this. Says the Tani Didan, my time alokatani lele. So we'll say, fine. First of all, I don't really understand what that means. That ultimately, again, in Rav Huna's locale, they called nighttime light. I'm not sure what that means. But why would the Tana of our Mishnah use an ambiguous lashon? So we'll say, again, remember, the beauty is, we just had a brayse, the Beis Shmuel, right? The Beis Shmuel said, right, leil arba asar. So why not just say that? Just say laila. Just, if you mean night, if everybody agrees that bedikas chametz takes place at night, just say that. Just say that, and you can save a certain incredible amount of time. Also, listen to this. Lishna ma'al Yehudinakit. Because ultimately, again, I'll say the Tana of our Mishnah wanted to use a more appropriate lashon. I'll say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. My time alotani leile. Rashi says, Kiditana de Beis Shmuel. Remember, in the Brayse of the Beis Shmuel, they use lashon of laila. So why doesn't the Tana of our Mishnah just do the same? Umeshani Alishna ma'alya kamahader. The Tana wanted to use a nicer lashon. Shemitzvah v'derech nikei hadas l'saper b'lashon nekiya. And ultimately, I'm going to both say, the Tana wanted to be a bit more appropriate and wanted to use a nicer lashon. So I will say, so what does this mean? What's wrong with the word Laila, right? In our lexicon of words we're not supposed to say, right? Laila does not usually show up there. So what's the Pshat? Rabbi say, if you take a look at the Mesoras Hashas, do you see in the upper right-hand column of your Gemara, Os Vav, Upirish Kinuihu, Kimoshe Korin Lusuma Sagi Nahar. So Rabbi say, listen to this. Apparently the Tana of our Mishnah felt that halacha l'maisa to begin a Masechta with Laila, with nighttime, it's not a good way to start a Masechta, right? Nighttime is dark, right? Nighttime is filled with uncertainty. Nighttime often refers to difficulty, right? Lahagid baboker chestacha v'amunascha ba'leilos. The morning is chesed, the nighttime is uncertainty. I need more amuna at night. The Tana didn't want to begin a Masechta with a lashon ultimately again of Laila. Incredible. So instead, what does it do? It uses R. So we'll say in the city of Rav Huna, what do they call R? They called R Naki, right? They used to call night light. The same way that the Gemara calls a blind person a Sagi Nahar, someone who sees very well. That was the euphemism. So therefore, we'll say the Tana wants to begin the Masechta in an upbeat, positive fashion and doesn't want to use a word which could engender feelings of difficulty, sadness, uncertainty, and challenge. And Rabbi say, this opens up a magnificent sugya. Here we go. Rabbi Shimon Levi says a person should never go ahead and utilize inappropriate language. Davar maguna b'fiv means never allow something disgusting to pass through your lips. Shahari ikim akosov shmona osios v'lo hotzi dvar maguna b'fiv. Because we'll say the Torah Kedosha goes out of its way, and we'll say generally we have a general klal, which is the Torah uses no extra words and no extra letters. Yet there are circumstances where the Torah does use extra words and extra letters in order to express something in a quote-unquote better, more bakavadik way. For example, Shene Emar, Mina Behema Torah, Mina Behema Shainena Torah. When the Torah speaks about, ultimately, again, kosher and non-kosher animals, so the Torah says, you can eat from the Behema Tahora, and not from the Behema Esher Einenu Tahora. From the Behema which is not Tahor. Why don't you just say from the Behema that's Tameya? The Torah doesn't want to use the Lashon of Tameya. Well, again, we'll say, we see the Torah uses Tameya many times. We'll discuss how exactly that balance is achieved. To which the Gemara says, so we'll say, you see, the Torah could have just said, Mina Behema Tameya. From a Behema Tameya, an impure animal. The fact that it said, Mina Behema Asher Einenu Tahora, from an animal that is not Tahor, teaching us a lesson. Now, let's say we have to be careful with what we say and how we say it. That a person should take incredible heed and caution. Le'olam shel yetze adam davar maguna befiv. Don't let something inappropriate pass by your lips. So the Gemara goes like to Rav Papa Amar Teisha. Rav Papa says we see the Torah uses 9 extra letters. Shnei Amar kiyeh b'cha ish asher lo yihiyeh tahar mikra laila. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Torah talks about a situation where you have a zav. So, this is not a zav, this is a seminal emission. So Torah says, if you have a man who is not tahar, because of a mikra laila, seminal emission, so why not just say he's tamei? Again, you see the Torah goes out of its way to say lo tahar instead of tameya. Ravina Amar as es eser. So Ravina says the Torah will use up to 10 extra letters because vav the tar. Tar is written malay, right, with the vav and not chaser. Good. Ravacha bar Yaakov Amar sheish esrei. Also, the Torah says even 16 more letters in order to speak in a more refined fashion. Shnei Amar ki ama mikrahu bilti taharhu kilotar. We'll say this is by David HaMelech. Without, we're not getting into the whole story now. But remember again, when David doesn't show up for the Sudat Shaul's house, for good reason, because Shaul was ready to kill him. So Shaul figures the reason why David didn't come is because maybe he's Tameh. But you see the Torah expresses that. Maybe David had a seminal mission. So how does Shaul say it? Ki Amar Mikrahu Bilti Tahar Kulo Tahar. Maybe he's, right, he is without Tahara because he's not Tahara. Both say, instead of just saying he's Tameh. He's Tameh. So you see again, there's a certain refined level of speech that we have to use. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, li'olam yisaper adam b'lashon nekiya. Person should always express himself with a lashon nikia, a refined language. So I want to point out over here, it goes without saying that you can't use nivel peh. It goes without saying that a person is not allowed to curse. A Jew doesn't curse, or a Jew doesn't use, inappropriate language. That the Gemara is not even talking about over here. That's so pashut. That's so obvious. What the Gemara is saying here is even in the articulation of quote unquote appropriate ideas, take heed and take care to express them in a refined fashion. It will say sometimes I could say something, but I say it in a crude manner. A Jew speaks in a refined manner. In a refined manner. So again, I will say this is not even nivel peh. Nivel peh, of course, we'll say that's it's not even shaykh, right? The Gemara doesn't even have to speak about that because that is so obvious. This is even if I'm not using any, inappropriate or curse words, how I express myself must be in a refined fashion. So the Gemara goes right there. Person should always express himself with a clean and refined lashon. Shahari bizav kiro merkov ubiisha karmosh. This is very interesting. Let's say via zav. The halacha is if a zav rides on something. So let's say a zav sits on a saddle. Right? He's on a horse, sits on a saddle. The saddle becomes tummy. So interestingly enough, by a man, the Torah uses the lashon of merkav, and by a woman it uses the lashon of moshav. Now both say. Interestingly enough, so what's the difference? No, it's the same thing. We'll say, but Merkov has a connotation of sitting on something with your legs spread apart. The Torah Kedosha did not want to use that lashon by a woman because the Torah felt that it just engenders the wrong imagery. A woman might sit that way as well, but when expressing something that a woman sits on, specifically like in a saddle family, the Torah did not want to use lashon of Moshe, which means with legs apart. So therefore, again, you see the Torah is expressing the same idea for a man and a woman, but yet utilizing a different lashon. Va'omer v'tivchar lashon arumim va'omer v'das sivsei bar milelu. So we'll say here the Gemara quotes two additional psukim. Literally, again, I chose for myself lashon rumim, right, a more refined lashon of omer das sivsei bar milelu. I chose for myself ultimately again a das sivsei bar, a clear lashon. My va'omer v'chite mahani milu b'daraisa aval b'drabanan. So you might have thought this obligation to choose refined lashon only applies biblically, but perhaps does not apply rabbinically. To which the Gemara says. The Gemara says, that even the wise ones should go ahead and choose out refined lashon. So we'll say even the Rabbanon, in the articulation of their halachas, must go ahead and, if you look at Rashi, mitzvah alecha kach. Ultimately, again, there's a mitzvah to go ahead and take upon yourself refined lashon. Bar milelu lashon naki mavura. Good. So you might have thought, well, maybe there's only an obligation to use refined lashon in the articulation of rabbinic law and biblical law, but maybe just stam wording. I don't have to be so meticulous. To which the Gemara said, "Ve'amida amalo omer v'das sivsei barar milelu." So we'll say, one second. So now you just told me by a man, it uses the lashon of Merkov, and by a woman it uses the lashon of Moshav, because Merkov has a connotation of sitting on the saddle with legs spread apart. So really, the Torah never used the lashon of Merkov by a woman. Vaksiv, we'll say, end of Parshas Chayisara, middle of Parshas Chayisara, vatakam Rivka v'naroseh, vatirkavna ala gmalim. The pasuk says, when Rivka leaves her parents' home, right, as she goes off to marry Yitzchak, Rivka and her maidens got up, vatirkavna, they rode on the camel. Or both say, right, vatirkav is lashon again of riding with legs apart. So the Torah uses the lashon not only by Rivka imenu, to which the Gemara says, Hasam mishum b'yisus the Gemara. Orcha hu, both say it's different. Camels in general, because they're high up, so there's a fear. Everybody rides with their legs spread apart on a camel. So therefore, again, that's the normal lashon to employ when riding a camel. We'll say the pasuk says Moshe took his wife and his sons. Again, lashon rachav, which means that by tzipor the lashon also is that she rode on the donkey. This is not a camel now, on the donkey with the legs spread apart. Hasam mishum amid beis, hasam mishum banav orchud. So we'll say it's different because there it mentions Moshe Rabbeinu's sons. Once it mentions his sons, meaning once there is a male who is mentioned there, it is appropriate and normal to use the lashon of atirkav. V'haksiv, the Gemara says v'haksiv v'hiro cheves ala chamar. So we'll say this is by the episode of Avigail. We'll say remember again that Abigail is writing down to David HaMelech to ask David to spare her husband, right? Her husband had disrespected David HaMelech in a dramatic way. So ultimately, we're not going to get into the whole story now, but the Gemara says as follows. So by Abigail, it says, V'hiro cheves ala chamar. She was riding on a donkey. So we'll say, so now it's a donkey. So you can't tell me ultimately again that it's a camel high up. It's only Abigail, so there's no men involved over here. And yet the Navi is using the lashon of Vatirkov. That ultimately again, and remember again, Vatirkov is the lashon of riding with legs spread apart. So how is this sanua? How is this lashon nakia? Ultimately by a woman. Hasamishum bi'isusa delayla orchohu. Both says she was coming to meet David at night. And because again, sometimes it can be a little bit scary to ride alone at night, therefore both say it was normal to say that she rode in a normal sitting fashion with legs spread apart out of fear. Because she was fearful about riding the donkey this time of night, that's a normal lashon. The Gemara says, Mishum bi'isusa delayla. Leka, Mishum bi'isusa David ika. The other possibility is she was afraid. But it's not that she was afraid of the night, she was afraid of David. She was afraid of David. Either way, she's gripped by fear. And because she's gripped by fear, she feels the need to sit on the donkey in a more stable fashion. V'bai sema. So I'll say, because normally, I guess the way a woman sometimes would sit on the donkeys, I don't know what the lashon is, what do you call it, like side saddle, right? So she would sit on it with both legs kind of hanging over the side. But obviously in this type of situation where there was that fear factor, either again because of nighttime, fear of David, or the other possibility is Zibai Sema, Bisusa the David Namilek. And no, she wasn't afraid of David. Mishub Bisusa Dahar Ika. Ultimately, once apparently she was riding down the side of a mountain. So that's what she was scared about. Either way, what the Gemara is saying over here is whether it's fear of night, fear of David, fear of the mountain, Abigail, the Navi used lashon of Batir Kavna, or V'hiro Cheves, out of fear. Out of fear. So we'll say, apparently, the lashon of Rachav by a woman will only be not sanua when it's not necessary. But apparently, again, when contextually it's understood why she would be riding in a more secure fashion, that's not considered to be an absence of lashon nekia. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, "Ubaraisa milo ksiv tame." So we'll say, let's go on for a second. So now, fine. So now I understand. Ultimately, again, remember, we'll say this is the Gemara's. I just want to point, just so you understand how we got here. How did we get here? Because we'll say the Gemara tells me at the end of the day, everyone agrees that R means what? Everyone agrees that what? R means night. So I said, so why don't you just say night? To which the Gemara says, again, the Tana didn't want to begin with the word night. Because night, again, has a connotation of negativity, sadness, fear, uncertainty. The Tana wants to begin in a nicer fashion. That opens the door for Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's idea, Li'olam al yotzi adam meguna mifiv. A person should always speak with refined lashon. The Ribono Shel Olam models this for us. The Navi models this for us. Chazal model this for us. Now, also remember again, one of the first examples we gave is that when the Torah refers to non-kosher, excuse me, Torah refers to non-kosher animals. So how does the Torah refer to non-kosher animals? Habehema asher inenu Torah. So the Gemara says, one second. The Gemara says, Ubaraisa milo ksiv tameh, but come on. The Torah uses the word tameh a lot, right? Tameh appears many times. So don't tell me that the Torah always uses a refined lashon. The Torah also uses tameh. Ella, listen to this. Ella dechol heichi dechi hadadi. I'm sorry. Ella kol heicha dechi hadadi ninu mishtay belashon nikia. Kol heicha denafishin mila mishtay belashon nikia. We'll say enachinami. The Gemara says like this: when the Torah could articulate the same concept in the same amount of words, but express it in a nicer fashion, the Torah always chooses the nicer fashion, what we call the lashon nikia. But if halacha lamaisa, the articulation in the form of lashon nikia will be more verbose than doing it in a more straightforward way, even if the more straightforward way is not as refined, we go with concise. So Rabbi say, what's fascinating over here is as follows. So now, obviously, that's not always true, because we see examples of where the Torah chooses a more verbose approach, that's lashon nikia, rather than a concise approach, which may be lashon meguna. Now, the Torah does that in a few specific areas to teach us this principle. to teach us this principle that always try to articulate your ideas, always use words that are ultimately, again, refined. Use the refined speech. After Torah teaches me that concept, then Abba say what we have is as follows: that halacha l'maisa, whenever I could articulate the same idea, b'lashon nekiyah, and it's no more words, right? It's not more verbose, then enachinami I do that. But if it's more verbose to express it in a lashon nekiyah, and I can say it in a more concise fashion, using a little bit of what we'll call a lashon meguna, even though meguna is too strong over here, we'll go with the more direct. So therefore I will say, many times it's obviously much more concise to say what? To say tameh than it is to say asher einenu tahora. So I'll do that once, maybe even twice, in order to highlight a concept. But we can't do that every time. We'll say, why? Listen to this. The Gemara says, Kidam Rav Huna Amarav, Amri Amrav Huna Amarav, Mishon Rabbi Meir, Li Olam Yishana Adam L'Talmido Derech Kitzara. Because Rabbi say, the best way to convey information is in a concise fashion. When the Rebbe wants to teach something to the Talmud, teach it in the most concise way possible. Rabbi say, concise over here also means concise and clear. Concise clarity. That's so express it in the most concise. Once you begin getting more verbose, the Talmud could often get lost. So good. So the idea of here, so here's what's fascinating. It seems to be able to say a little bit that what you have is this tension, right? On one hand, there's a need to go ahead and speak b'lashon nekiyah. On the other hand, there's a need to be as concise as possible. And the Ribono Shel Olam, who is the ultimate Rebbe, wants to teach us in a concise fashion. So this is the tension. If I always want to speak b'lashon nekiyah, ultimately, again, it's going to be a bit more verbose. So, but yet again, the best way to convey information is in a concise fashion. So this is the tension. So that's why I both say the Torah will go out of its way to speak a few times in a more verbose fashion, that's lashon nekiyah, to highlight the principle. And the principle is speak with refined mouth. Speak with refined words. Speak with lashon nikiyah. But then the Torah stops using the more verbose form, even though, again, perhaps it's a bit more refined. Why? To teach us another principle, which is that when you convey information in the most concise way possible. Which we'll say, in general, is an incredible klal. It also teaches us, we'll say, about not to always be talking. There's sometimes express things and say what you have to say. Measure your words. Make sure every word is meaningful and speaks on its own. Don't be a verbose individual. Whatever you have to say, figure it out, identify the word choices, and express your idea. So the Gemara goes weiter. So is that true? That whenever I could express the same concept, B'lashon nekiyah, b'lashon meguna, that I should express it b'lashon nekiyah. Is that true? The Gemara says, "I v'harocheves v'yosheves techiyah dadininu." So I will say, but rocheves and yosheves is mamish the same amount of letters. The ka'amar rocheves, but the pasuk will use rocheves. I can use the same lashon of yosheves. Why use rocheves? To which the Gemara says, rocheves ksiv. It's rocheves written chaser. So I will say, because rocheves is written with the vav, then without the vav, chaser, therefore it's a shorter form. Good. We'll say, here we go. We'll say, listen to this story. There are two Talmidim who are standing in front, who are sitting in front of Rav, learning. Chadamar, one of them said, Shevisin haishmaisa kidavar echad mesankin. I've been working so hard on this sugya that literally we're going to say, I am as tired as a davar acher. We'll say davar acher is a chazer, is a pig. So this guy said like, I'm as tired as a pig. I've been working on this sugya like crazy. I'm flying through this gemara. I'm as tired as a pig. The other guy said, the chadamar shevisin hashmaisa kegedim mesankin. I've also been working on this sugya, and I am as tired as a gedi. I'm as tired as a kid. And Rav would not pay attention to the first Talmud. The first Talmud who said, I'm as tired as the davar acher, I'm as tired as a chazer, Rav would not speak to him. I will say, ultimately, because that's not a way to talk. It's not a way to talk. I will say, in general, there's an insistence about not speaking. That's what we call a chazer, a davar acher. And even if you have to refer to a chazer, ultimately, again, it's preferable not even to use the English name of pig, but to go ahead and use the Hebrew word chazer, because the chazer represents tumah. Chazer represents tumah. So there's a notion. I'll say it's interesting. It's a lot of interesting. Even like with children's books, about certain people have hakpadas, about what it is that you ultimately, again, bring into home. There's idea of ultimately just being makpid with what it is that you say. So we don't say chazer, we don't say davar acher. So therefore, again, Rav felt that this Talmid Chacham who said, I'm as tired as a chazer, that's not the way you talk. That's just not the way you talk. And therefore, again, Rav would not pay attention to him. Another story. We'll say, ultimately, again, there were two Talmidei Chacham sitting in front of Hillel. The Chad min Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Wow, one of them was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Remember, we'll say, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a Talmid of Hillel. We'll say, remember again, who else is in Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's class? Who else is in his class? Remember, who else? Yonasan ben Uziel was also in the class. Targum Yonasan. Yonasan ben Uziel was the top of the class. Who was the bottom of the class? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Well, so can you imagine that, Chevra? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the bottom of the class of Hillel. But yet Hillel said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's going to be an Av Ladoros. He's going to be a father of generations. So Amrulei Kamei the Rebbe, others say was sitting in front of Rebbe. The Chad Minar Rabbi Yochanan. So ultimately again, and one said the story happened in front of Rebbe, and one of the Talmud was Rabbi Yochanan. Chad Amar Mipnei Ma Botzrim Mitara. They most Mitara. So I'll say one of the Talmidei Chacham said, why is it that when you harvest grapes, you must make sure to go again and harvest them in utensils which are tahar? Vein Moski when harvesting olives, you don't have to be makbid to use a tahar kli. The chadarim they ma botzim betara umoskin betuma. And the other Talmud said, why? Same idea, but use just different words. Why is it that when harvesting grapes, you have to use a tahar utensil, but yet with olives, you could even use a tameh utensil? So I will say they both said the same thing. They both say just very quickly, what it's talking about is like this. In order for an item to become tameh, it has to first come in contact with liquid. The juice that oozes out of grapes has the status of a chash of a liquid, therefore makes the grapes right the kabel tumah. Therefore, you have to harvest grapes in a kli that is tar. The juice that oozes out of olives is not considered chashiv, and therefore it does not make the olives right the kabel tumah. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, you could harvest olives even in a kli that's not tar. So both Talmidei Chacham articulated the same idea. Just one called the kli of the olives eino tar, and one called it tameh. To which he was Amar. So ultimately, again, the teacher said over here, and I will say both of these stories. In first version, the one who used the right lashon, right, the more refined lashon was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and in the second version, the one who used ultimately again the correct lashon, the refined lashon was Rabbi Yochanan. Amar, the Rebbe said, Muftach ani bazeh shemora hora b'Yisrael. I have complete confidence that I will say in version 1, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, version 2, Rabbi Yochanan will be someone who will lead, will be a leader of Klal Yisrael. Mora Hora will be ultimately again someone who decides halacha for Klal Yisrael. V'lo hayayam mu'atim at shehora hora abi Yisrael. And it was only a few days later, ultimately, or I should say only a short time later, until Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai emerged as a leader, until Rabbi Yochanan emerged as a leader. So we'll have to stop over here for today. In Mirat Hashem again, this we'll say incredible sugya continues into tomorrow as well. Yes, Shakayach, we'll stop here.